So Carlton Leach recently appeared on the Criminal Minds podcast hosted by Terry Stone, where he discussed in part his knowledge concerning the Essex boys' murders. In this video, I'll play for you a short clip from the podcast in question, which discusses the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, and after which I'll be sharing some of my own thoughts and opinions.
Mickey Steele and Jack Williams have always protested their innocence, right? Do you think that they did it, or do you think they were involved in it?
I've never met Jack Williams, never heard of him. But I obviously met Mickey Steele a few times. But it was all very secretive. That was when Pat and Tony would be out somewhere, birthday party, Mickey Steele, and they'd be in the corner, introduced them, had a quick chat, moved away. Right. So I never really knew the man. Pat was awesome in the prison world. He had a big reputation.
So that's how they met through.
Yeah.
Right.
He looked after like Reggie and Reggie's boyfriend and everything else that went on in them days. And in the prison system, because he trained, he was fit, he was 6'4", and he looked the part, and he didn't give a he loved the terror. So everyone used Pat, you know what I mean? Even the screws turned a blind eye because he could do things for them that no one else could do. So he was allowed privileges. So in the prison system, if he was in the prison system, he'd still be alive now, because he thrived on it in a way.
Right.
But it's like, what was we saying? Get back to...
Well, no, just about if you thought that was involved.
So he was banged up with Mickey Steele. They become very good friends, and he obviously, I think he sort of half looked after Mickey, had his back in prison. So they had a relationship. So when Pat got out, a bit of time later, because they were sort of out doing work on their own and everything else, about a pilot, and then Pat said, I've got this bloke called Mickey Steele, pilot and all that. He brought him on board, settled the meets up. They were doing all stuff. Tony went, do you want to put money in to get this stuff? And I went, not interested. Right. I'm not interested. I'm all right. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. Got me money. I'm not interested going out there and doing all that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like I said, that was when there was a lot of desperation. They were doing far too much drugs, and they were desperate for money. Right. That's why they were doing their deal. Pat was unstable.
Right.
So anything that went wrong, he just turned on you and go, I'm going to fucking kill you. I'll kill you, murder. And that's where the thing come, obviously, of the cut where the gear was janked with Mickey, right? Everyone knew about that. I did know that to reimburse them, that there was the thing going to go on, that he was going to land the plane, there was this secret thing. So my thing is, did he actually kill him? I will never know to this day, and I don't want to know.
Right.
It's too many years later. I'm not interested now. Even if I know it, don't bring them back.
Right.
He served 30-odd years in prison, and Jack has. I don't know whether Jack... The only thing I knew was, obviously, the reason they went down there was because Mickey had organised it, because I knew that, because I spoke to Tony the night before, and I knew everything was what was going on, and I didn't want to be involved in it.
Okay, so let's just stop it there very briefly. Now, this is one aspect of this case that has never sat right with me. It's never felt right that the whole idea behind this is that I'm going to set up this massive event, right? I want Tucker, Tate and Rolfe killed. So what I'll do is I'll set up this massive event surrounding it. So what I'll say is I'm flying in a bloody plane, right? A plane. I'm going to land in a farmer's field. We're going to have Tucker and Tate. They're going to be hiding in a ditch with a machine gun. I'm going to land the plane. They're going to take me hostage, maybe bash me up a little bit, take the product, we'll split it, and then we'll all be filthy rich. But actually, what's really going to happen is I'm going to lure them to the bottom of an isolated farm track. Jack's going to be waiting in the bushes. We're going to take them all out. We're going to kill all three of them. Now, to me, that seems utterly ridiculous. Now, this plan, by all accounts, wasn't put together at the last minute. It wasn't formulated 24 hours before Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were killed. This was formulated and planned weeks and weeks earlier. Back when they went over to Holland, they were paid back, they were compensated for the dud cannabis deal, they were reimbursed for the dud cannabis deal financially. And then by all accounts, Michael Steele holds out the olive branch to Pat Tate and says, look, I know this has been a bit of a hassle, but I've got this deal coming up with this London firm, right? I'm going to be flying in a plane laden with coke. Why don't you and Tony turn up there with some weapons, maybe a submachine gun, for instance, take me hostage, take the goods, we'll split it, we'll make a load of money. Anyone with a brain larger than a peanut will think to themselves, well, if I say that, they're going to tell everybody else. They're going to be telling Carlton Leach. They're going to be telling Bob the Builder. They're going to be telling their next door neighbour, anyone who will listen, that they're coming into a load of money. Well, Pat, what are you doing on the 6th? Well, I can't go down the pub tonight, lads. I'm meeting Mickey Steele. He's bringing in a load of gear. I'm going to be filthy rich. He knows the persona of these individuals. He knows they're brash, loudmouth, bullies, whatever you want to call them. He knows full well that by putting this plan together, it's going to get out to other people. Now, somewhere in this miraculous, marvellous plan thought up here by Michael Steele, surely in his consideration would be the fact that if I come up with this grandiose plan, and for instance, Tucker, Tate and Rolfe tell their girlfriends or associates who they're going to meet that night, then when the police discover the bodies of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, that's going to put me front and centre of this investigation. Now, why would an intelligent man, who was supposedly planning this for some days or even weeks, openly invite those closest to Tucker, Tate and Rolfe to know who they were meeting the night that they were killed? To me, that makes no sense whatsoever. Now, in this interview, we have Carlton Leach discussing the fact that, yes, he knew very well that they were going to meet Michael Steele that night. There was some sort of deal taking place, and he was well aware of that the night before. Now, to the best of my knowledge, Carlton Leach's phone number wasn't included in the telephone logs presented during the trial. And again, I'm talking about the trial of Jack Womes and Michael Steele. That's not to say that the call between Carlton and Tony didn't happen. That's absolutely not what I'm saying here. But the important point to remember is that Carlton Leach's telephone number wasn't included on the trial exhibit. And again, I'm talking about the trial of Jack Womes and Michael Steele. So we have no way really of proving or disproving that particular conversation. But the important point to take from Carlton's interview here is this mention of the deal. Was it simply, as we've been told all along, that Michael Steele was going to lure these individuals under the pretense of some upcoming drug deal, or did something else take place on the evening that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were killed? So what I plan to do now is to provide you with the factual information regarding what transpired between these individuals the night before they were murdered. This includes the telephone calls, who was speaking to who, and the police statements discussing the behaviour of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe the night before they were killed. Now, Carlton Leach in that interview there has made mention of some kind of upcoming deal, so do keep that in mind as we move forward. Firstly, let's take a look at a small section of the police statement given by Pat Tate's then girlfriend, Lizzie Fletcher. Take a look at the following. On Friday the 8th of the 12th, 95, at South Woodham Ferrers Police Station, I took a statement from Elizabeth Ann Fletcher, during which Elizabeth informs me that on Tuesday the 5th of December 1995, in the early evening, Pat received a phone call on his mobile phone. She didn't hear the conversation and it was very short, but afterwards Pat was really happy and said to Elizabeth, "I'm alright now." She said Pat had been stressed up lately. Craig and Tony then came round to Pat's home, where they had a conversation in the kitchen, which she says she did not hear. They then left and Pat told Elizabeth she had to leave and that he was going away for a couple of days and that he would contact her. Okay, so why do I believe that this particular phone call is of the utmost importance in understanding what took place on the evening of December the 6th and the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe? Well, in my opinion, this telephone call that Lizzie Fletcher refers to in her police statement here, this telephone call comes from the halfway house. The halfway house being the key meeting point the evening that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were murdered. The reason that I believe that this call comes from the halfway house is the following. Further alleged omissions from the trial telephone schedule include a call from Mr. Steele to the Great Bentley Park telephone kiosk on the 11th of November 1995 at 10:06, and the important part, and a call from the halfway house telephone kiosk to Mr. Tate on the 5th of December 1995 at 17:03. So Lizzie Fletcher talks about a telephone call that Pat Tate receives. He's pissed off. He's in a bad mood. His telephone call comes through. All of a sudden, Pat Tate's mood completely changes. He goes from pissed off to, oh, I'm fine now. I'm absolutely fine. Immediately, he's on the phone to Tucker and Rolfe. They come round to Tate's address and Lizzie is kicked out. They've had some sort of news, haven't they? Something's taken place during that phone call which has changed Tate's whole persona. They've had some kind of news. Now, the reason that I believe that this call comes from the halfway house, and it's at 1703, this phone call that Lizzie's referring to here, is because when we take a look at the telephone evidence here for Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, it's very interesting. So we've got 1703, a phone call from the halfway house to Pat Tate. At 1708, so 5 minutes later, Pat Tate is on the phone to Tony Tucker. 2 minutes later, Tucker's mobile is calling back Pat Tate. 1 minute after that, Tate's mobile back to Tucker's mobile. 1 minute later, Tate's mobile to Rolfe's landline. And 8 minutes later, Tony Tucker's mobile to Craig Rolfe's landline. They're all calling one another. They've had some sort of news. What also lends even further credibility to this idea that the telephone call from the halfway house is imperative to understand what transpired with the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, and why I believe that phone call is so important, is when we take a look at what happens later that evening on December the 5th. So we've got the telephone call. Let's just recap. We've got the telephone call at 5:05. Tate's attitude completely changes. He's on the phone immediately to Tucker and Rolfe. They turn up at his property. Lizzie's kicked out. And then the next day, Lizzie speaks to Pat. So now we're moving forward to the Wednesday, the day in which they're killed. And in Lizzie Fletcher's statement, it states the following here. On Wednesday morning, when Liz rang Pat at home, as per her statement, he had a go at her. He said he'd been in a field all night and he was muddy. She made a comment about who he was with, i.e. another girl, and he said no, he was with Tucker. So put the pieces of this very simple puzzle together. You've got the phone call from the halfway house. Tate's attitude completely changes. They've had some sort of news, haven't they? They've had some sort of information that we need to look at this lane, we need to be going here, we need to be going there, we need to meet up this evening because we're on for the 6th, or something along those lines. They've been lured out. And in my opinion, as I've stated in a previous video, this was the dry run. Let's see if we can get Tucker, Tate and Rolfe together. Let's see who turns up. Let's see if they turn up armed. And let's see if they're overly suspicious if we lure them to a secluded location. Now, it would be incredibly remiss of me if I didn't mention in this video the location of Jack Womes on the evening of December the 5th. So again, we've got this telephone call from the halfway house payphone to Pat Tate at 1703. And then at 1807, Jack Womes makes a call on his mobile phone to Michael Steele. And this telephone call is serviced by the telephone mast that covers the Rettendon area. Now, Jack Womes will tell you that he was at his uncle's or doing some knitting in a caravan park or this, that and the other. The truth of the matter is that we don't know. We've got no idea whatsoever what Jack Womes was doing at 1807. Some people will say he was down the lane, he was checking the gate, he was checking the comings and goings, and then relaying that information on to Michael Steele. The only person who knows what was taking place at 1807 on December the 5th in terms of Jack Womes is Jack Womes himself. Now, again, it's very, very interesting, though, and worthy of mention, that just over an hour after this very important phone call is received by Pat Tate, Jack Womes' mobile phone is picked up on the mast that services the Rettendon area. So now we've dealt in detail with the day before the murders, let's move on to Wednesday the 6th, the day that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe would be killed. Now, shortly before the murders, Pat Tate's long-term friend Barry Dorman receives a telephone call, or at least he speaks to Pat Tate on the telephone. Now, let's take a look at a small section of Barry Dorman's police statement. It states the following here. En route to Squash, I received a phone call from Mickey Stenning stating that Herc, which is my pet name for Pat Tate, i.e. short for Hercules due to his size, had arrived at the car front to collect the VW Passat. Pat then came onto the phone and told me he would still take the vehicle even though he didn't need it, as he had had a bust-up with Sarah Saunders. I told him that he didn't have to take it, but he insisted that he would. He told me he would pay for the vehicle in the morning as he had a, quote, lump of money coming. As a result, I agreed to Pat taking the vehicle that night, which he did. So I would suggest that this is evidence that Tate, at this point in time, very shortly before the murders take place, is expecting some kind of windfall, some sort of money coming in. There's money coming in very shortly. Don't worry about the car. I don't really need it, but I'll buy it anyway because I've got a lump of money coming. And again, for me, this is all tied back to that original call, the call on the 5th from the halfway house. They had some news. Tate's spirits are lifted. All of a sudden, there's a meeting. Tucker and Rolfe are in the field that night. And then, lo and behold, they're found on December the 7th next to a locked 5-bar gate, heading to open fields and open farmland. It's all part of the same plan. So finally, let's have a look at the connection. On December the 5th, 1703, the incoming call to Pat Tate from the halfway house payphone. Lizzie Fletcher is with Pat Tate during this call at Tate's address. She remarks that Tate's mood completely changes. He goes from stressed out and pissed off. All of a sudden, this short phone call comes through, and Pat Tate is completely fine. Oh, all right now, I'm fine. Immediately after that telephone call, Pat Tate is on the phone to Tucker and Rolfe. They're all communicating between one another, and Tucker and Rolfe turn up at Tate's address. Lizzie is kicked out. Around this time period, 1807, so just over an hour after that call from the halfway house payphone, Jack Wome's mobile phone is calling Michael Steele's landline. Jack Wome's phone connects to the mast, which services the Rettendon area. Pat Tate later tells Lizzie that him and Tucker were in a field later that night. Pat's pissed off, he's muddy, he's this, that and the other. He's been in a field all night with Tony Tucker. On December the 6th, the day that they're killed, shortly before the murders, Pat Tate has a phone conversation with Barry Dorman and tells him, don't worry about the car. I don't really need it, but I've got a lump of money coming. I'll come and pay you for the car tomorrow. Don't worry about it. He's had some sort of news. Some sort of deal is taking place. Pat is expecting some money. And again, on the 5th, the fact that Tate and Tucker are in a field, I would suggest, is the dry run. Let's get them out on the 5th. Let's see who turns up. Let's see if they turn up armed. Let's see if we can lure them to an isolated location without them being overly suspicious. So what is the connection? When Darren Nichols is arrested many months later, the halfway house pub turns out to be the meeting point with Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. Now, as many people know, with this case, there are many competing hypotheses. Some people believe that the only individuals connected in this crime are Darren Nichols, Michael Steele, and Jack Womes. Other people believe that they were actually killed at midnight and that these individuals had nothing whatsoever to do with this crime. As I've stated in previous videos, it is my belief that they were indeed killed shortly before 7 p.m, but based on the Darren Nichols police interviews and his proven subsequent connections post the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, I certainly believe there is the potential of a third-party involvement in these murders. And to be honest, I've never been wholeheartedly convinced that Jack Womes and Michael Steele were the gunmen on the evening of December the 6th. The question I haven't seen answered, however, for those of you who do believe Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were indeed killed at midnight, is who were Tucker, Tate and Rolfe with shortly before 7 p.m? Let's take a look at a small section of the statement given by Sarah Saunders. About 1845, I phoned Pat on his mobile phone. I phoned because when I saw him in the afternoon, he'd been very, very hyped up. He was like that normally when he had something on his mind. When I phoned him, he was a little calmer but said, I cannot talk to you now. I've got people with me. I'll talk to you tomorrow. This was not the response I would expect from him if he was just with Tony and Craig. This was the last contact I had with Pat. Okay, so as we know, the prosecution's case was that shortly after this telephone call between Pat Tate and Sarah Saunders, Tucker, Tate and Rolfe would be murdered. Yet what I haven't seen any discussion on, particularly if you do believe that they weren't actually killed around this time period, around 7 p.m, and actually they were killed closer to midnight, is who were Tucker, Tate and Rolfe with just before 7 o'clock? Because quite clearly here, Sarah's saying, well, he was a little bit guarded, he was a bit secretive during this telephone call. I cannot talk to you now, I've got people with me, I'll talk to you tomorrow. It's never been mentioned, has it? Particularly by those of you who do believe in this midnight theory. Who were Tucker, Tate and Rolfe with if it wasn't Michael Steele, Jack Womes, Darren Nichols, or a third party connected to those individuals? Who were Tucker, Tate and Rolfe with shortly before 7 p.m? Now, of course, this is quite an in-depth look at what took place leading up to the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, and it would be interesting to hear your thoughts at home. Do you believe this case is as simple as was told in court by the prosecution, that Michael Steele orchestrated these events and advertised the fact in broad daylight to those closest to Tucker, Tate and Rolfe? Was Michael Steele's role simply to facilitate that meet with Tucker, Tate and Rolfe where others would be waiting? Was it some kind of deal which then turned into a double cross, catching Steele and Womes by surprise? Do let me know some of your own thoughts down in the comment section below.